Eastern, the Senate will recess for their weekly party lunches. Now to the Senate floor for live coverage here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Lord, we open our hearts to you in gratitude for the blessing of another day. Renew us, revitalize us with the knowledge of your loving providence. Have mercy on our nation and world this day. Solidify the financial foundations of teetering nations and restrain those who seek to reap gain from others' woes. Lord, bless the many on Capitol Hill who give of their time and talents in such full measure to keep liberty's light burning brightly. May their trust in your word sustain them with confidence in the difficult days to come. We pray in your sacred name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., October 4th, 2011. To the Senate. Under provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Jeanne Shaheen, a senator from the state of New Hampshire, to perform the duties of the chair. Son Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
The Majority Leader.
Later remarks, the Senate will be in the morning business for 1 hour. Majority will control the first half, the Republicans will control the final half. Holding morning business, Senate will resume consideration of motion to proceed S. 1619. Senate will recess from 12:30 to 2:15 today to allow for our weekly caucus meetings. At 2:30, the Senate will begin consideration of S. 1619, which is the China currency legislation. That's how it's referred. Roll call votes are possible during today's session. We'll notify senators when they're scheduled. And I would hope that senators, both Democrats and Republicans, who want to offer amendments would contact the managers of the bill. We need to get these amendments moving as quickly as possible. Hopefully on most of them we can do time agreements. It's important legislation and we need to expedite it as quickly as possible. It's a busy work period we have, and we have a couple of important holidays. We have the Yom Kippur, which starts Friday at sundown, which is the highest of all the holidays of the Jewish faith. And then we have the Columbus Day, which is Monday. So we have a couple of short weeks here. Last night, the Senate held an overwhelming bipartisan vote to move forward with legislation preventing continued currency manipulation by the Chinese government. This unfair practice, which gives Chinese exports an unmerited advantage in the global marketplace, injures the American economy. It hurts American manufacturers, and it costs American jobs, lots of them. In 1990, America's trade deficit with China was $10 billion. 20 years later, thanks to currency manipulation, that gives an edge to Chinese exporters. That trade deficit has soared to $273 billion, from $10 billion to $273 billion. That trade deficit has fueled the loss of about 3 million American jobs, including 2 million manufacturing jobs in just the last 10 years alone. In Nevada, we've lost more than 14,000 jobs to China trade, and it's all because of currency manipulation. The 8 hardest hit states have lost 1.4 million positions total. 17 states have lost more than 2% of their jobs. Manufacturers simply can't compete with Chinese government when it gives its exporters advantages that other countries don't get. American workers and manufacturers work as hard and as ingenious as any in the world. They don't need special advantages to succeed. They just need a fair shot. This important jobs legislation will give them that fair shot. Putting an end to China's deliberate actions to undervalue its currency will even the playing field. It will also support 1.6 million American jobs. Demanding a fair playing field would pump $300 million into our economy in just a few short years. $300 billion. But don't take my word for it, Madam President. Just ask American manufacturers. The Alliance for American Manufacturers called this jobs bill the, quote, deficit-reducing, job-creating, no-cost stimulus that's desperately needed, end of quote. Business groups have lined up to testify to the adverse impacts of currency manipulations on the U.S. corporate interests. The American Iron and Steel Institute, the National Association of Manufacturers, and even the United States Chamber of Commerce have said the problem pits American and Chinese manufacturers against one another in an unfair fight. But this issue has also forged some strange alliances. The AFL-CIO has also called for swift action to level the playing field. The Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO are together. This is what the AFL-CIO said, and I quote, "The single most important job-supporting trade measure that Congress can take is to arrest the Chinese government's manipulation of its currency," end of quote. Business and labor groups agree that American workers and manufacturers aren't getting a fair shake, and they agree on what action Congress should take. Action to give them that fair shake. We all know that doesn't happen very often. Here in the Senate, we've heard the message loud and clear. We can't ignore blatant, unfair trade practices that put American workers at a disadvantage. Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart said, quote, "Fairness is what justice really is. Fairness is what justice really is," close quote. This week, the Senate is demanding justice for American companies and their employees. I know that a few of my Democratic colleagues don't support this legislation, but very few. There are some Republicans who don't support this legislation, but very few. But even though there are a few on each side who don't support this legislation, I think this is the mark of a good piece of legislation. It can garner a significant number of votes from each party. That's what bipartisanship is all about. With millions of Americans' livelihoods at stake, I'm pleased to see the Senate working on a truly bipartisan bill.
Madam President.
The Republican leader.
Madam President, a lot of talk these days about Washington is broken and how unless we do something to fix it, the solutions to our most urgent problems will remain out of reach. The fact is, it's not really true. Congress is not frozen in a state of perpetual gridlock, and the now imminent passage of 3 long-awaited free trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea shows it. For 2.5 years, I and other Republicans have stated as clearly as we could to anyone who would listen that we are willing and eager to work with the Democrats on legislation that we know both sides agree on. Free trade agreements fall squarely into that category. That's why I've been calling on the President to approve them since his very first day in office. Yet for reasons that I'll touch on in a moment, he's actually held back. Now, it is true that the President had to be convinced of the importance of these agreements. After all, he ran for office promising to renegotiate NAFTA. But once he did come around, his reluctance to act became an emblem for the administration's entire approach to jobs. in which results have taken a back seat to ideology. All the President had to do was to follow through on his own pledge, send these trade agreements up to Congress, and we'd have had an early bipartisan achievement that didn't add a single dime to the deficit and which, by his own estimates, would protect tens of thousands of jobs right here at home. Instead, the President passed over what could have been a job-creating bipartisan layup and devoted the first weeks of his presidency to a highly partisan stimulus that has since become a national punchline. 2.5 years after the stimulus was signed into law, there are 1.7 million fewer jobs in America, and the President is just this week getting around to free trade agreements we all knew would create jobs. All of which raises a question. Why didn't we do this sooner? I think there are two reasons that we didn't do it sooner. First, the White House was under pressure from unions who don't like free trade. They've been extracting promises from the White House for 2.5 years in exchange for their support. That's one reason. The second reason the White House didn't send these agreements up sooner is that the political operators over at the White House seem to believe that they benefit from the appearance of gridlock. They're over there telling any reporter who will listen that they plan to run against Congress next year. Their communications director said as much to the New York Times 2 weeks ago. So that's their explicit strategy to make people believe that Congress can't get anything done. And how do you make sure of that? Well, you do that by proposing legislation you know the other side won't support, even when there's an entire menu of bipartisan proposals the President could choose to pursue instead. How else do you explain the President standing before the country in January, extolling the job-creating potential of these free trade agreements, asking Congress to pass them as soon as possible, and then sitting on them until yesterday, preventing Congress from taking the vote? How else do you explain the fact that the President spent the past few weeks running around the country demanding that Congress pass his so-called jobs bill right away, even as leading members of his own party admit that the Democrats wouldn't have the votes to get it through Congress, even if it came to the floor? As one senior Democrat aide put it yesterday, nobody's all that excited about the President's jobs bill. That's how you create dysfunction, by refusing to acknowledge that we live under a two-party system in this country, and that as long as we do, the two parties will have to cooperate to some extent in order to get legislation through Congress. It's the refusal to accept this reality that leads to inaction. The President can govern as though this is the Congress he wants, or he can deal with the Congress he has. Along the first path lies gridlock, and along the second lies the kind of legislative progress Americans want. And as for Republicans, well, we've been crystal clear from the outset that we prefer the latter route. So this morning I reiterate the same plea that I've consistently made for the past 2.5 years. My suggestion to the President is that he put aside proposals for which we know there is bipartisan opposition and focus instead on proposals for which we know both sides can agree. Free trade agreements are a good first step, but they're just that, a first step. If we're going to tackle the enormous challenges we face, we need to come together on much, much more than that. There is bipartisan agreement, for instance, on the need to increase domestic energy exploration, to reverse job-killing regulations, to reform the corporate tax code so we're more competitive. If the White House really wants to make a statement, it will work with us on all of these things. If it doesn't, Americans will only conclude that it would rather have an issue to run on than an impact. With these trade agreements, we're showing we can work together to create jobs and help the economy. It's something we should do a lot more of around here. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business for 1 hour, with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first half and the Republicans controlling the final half.
Madam President.
The senator from Illinois.
Madam President, I listened carefully to the statement made by the Minority Leader, Senator McConnell of Kentucky, concerning the current state of affairs in the United States Senate. I certainly want to endorse his conclusion that we should find ways to work together, try to find solutions, bipartisan solutions in this divided government that will truly address the problems that America faces. And if you ask people across America about our problems, number one on the list is the creation of jobs, the high unemployment. President Obama has come forward with a jobs plan, which he is now trying to sell to Congress as well as to the American people, with some success, certainly when it comes to appealing to the public. When you ask the American people, is it a good idea to give a payroll tax cut to working families so that they have more spending power, so that they can not live paycheck to paycheck, fill the gas tank, go shopping? Of course, it makes sense. And that's one of the pillars of the President's Jobs Act. The President also proposes that we give tax breaks, particularly to businesses, smaller businesses, that hire the unemployed, including veterans. And if you ask the American public, what do you think of that? Overwhelmingly, they think that's a good idea. When you say the President's plan also tries to help those state and local governments that are facing layoffs of teachers, firefighters, and policemen by lessening the impact that would have, the American people say that's a reasonable thing. We don't believe crowded classrooms and communities without fire and police protection are good for our future. So they endorse the President's approach to that. The President also thinks that we should invest in this Jobs Act in rebuilding the fundamental structure of the American economy. Not only highways, and bridges, and airports, but our schools. And the American people have overwhelmingly said that's a good idea. So the President said, but we should pay for this. And we should pay for it by making certain that those who can afford to pay more in taxes, those making $1 million or more, pay a little more in taxes so that we can achieve the things that I outlined earlier. Well, it turns out that that is not only approved by the American people, 59% of Republicans agree with that, raising taxes on the highest income Americans to help move this economy forward. 59% of Republicans agree with that. As someone said in a meeting this morning, unfortunately, none of them are serving in Congress. And the Republican senators and members of the House are saying, no way would we consider any additional taxes on the wealthiest people in America, even if the money is going to be used to give payroll tax cuts to working families and to give tax incentives and credits to small businesses and to avoid laying off and firing firefighters and policemen and teachers. They say, no way. So when the Minority Leader comes to the floor in the Senate and says we've got to find things where there's common agreement, let me tell you, what the President's jobs bill does is to come up with a bipartisan approved approach to getting this economy moving. And I hope that we can find a way to do exactly that. The Minority Leader talked this morning about trade agreements, and our hope is to bring those up in the very, very near future. And I think it's a good thing. But we made it clear as well that before it could be seriously considered, we needed to take a look at something called Trade Adjustment Assistance. That is a program to help workers who lose jobs because of trade agreements or because of trade relationship between the United States and another country. I've had it happen in my state. I'm sure the presiding officer in New Hampshire has had the same thing, where people have lost jobs because of competition overseas or jobs moving overseas. Well, we want to make sure those workers have a fighting chance to pick up new skills and education so that they can find another job in this economy and provide for their families. That was a condition to bringing up the trade agreements. We passed it in the Senate. It is now pending in the House. But we can move to those trade agreements. Let the Senate and the House vote accordingly. But the reason why it's been delayed, if there's been any delay, is to get that part right. And I think the Senate has done that. So, Madam President, I heartily agree with the conclusion of the Minority Leader that we should work together in a bipartisan fashion. I suggest to the Minority Leader take a look at the President's Jobs Act. Most of the ideas there are ideas Republicans have openly endorsed time and time again. I hope they are not going to reject the Obama Jobs Act because the word Obama is in the title. Let them come forward and think about ways with us to design an economy that's moving forward rather than design the next presidential campaign slogan and bumper sticker. The American people expect us to look beyond campaigns and get something done on the floor of the Senate and of the House. Now, I might differ with the Minority Leader when it comes to whether or not we've had gridlock and obstruction here in the Senate. And I would just say, for the record, it has become a matter of course, a normal part of the business of the Senate to require 60 votes on virtually everything. 60 votes. That isn't required in the rules of the Senate. We have reached the 60-vote threshold because of Republican filibusters. If it were simply an up or down majority vote, 51 votes would do it. But the Republicans, by threatening filibusters and imposing filibusters, have created a 60-vote requirement. That gives them leverage. It takes away the power of the minority, or majority, I should say, and gives the minority this new empowerment. But to suggest this hasn't been used and things have gone along just swell around here, take a look at the record. 3 times now we have been knocking on the door of closing down the government and closing down the economy just this year. The American people noticed. They didn't like it. Standard & Poor's noticed and downgraded the American credit rating, saying the problem is not the economy, the problem is the political system, which is in gridlock in Washington. That's a reality. We can change that. We should change that. And I encourage my colleagues on both sides to look for ways to change that. Yesterday, incidentally, Madam President, I spoke about the Bank of America's decision to impose a $5 fee on their loyal customers who have debit cards. Bank of America announced that this fee had to be collected because they were going to be restrained in the amount of swipe fees they could charge for people who use debit cards. Now, those who followed this issue know the Federal Reserve took a look at this. Every time we use a piece of plastic to pay for something as a debit card, there's a charge imposed on the retailer, the restaurant, the bookstore, the grocery store, you name it. There's a charge imposed. And so we asked the Federal Reserve to take a look at that charge that's being imposed by the credit card companies through the banks, and here's what they found. The actual cost of a bank and Visa or MasterCard processing a debit card transaction is anywhere from 4 cents to 12 cents. Remember when they used to process checks for pennies, no matter what the face value was? Well, the actual cost of the debit card, the new checking account, the plastic checking account, is 4 cents to 12 cents a transaction. Then the Federal Reserve Board said, what are they actually charging to the retailers? 44 cents is the average charge by the banks and credit card companies for the use of a debit card. More than 10 times the 4-cent rate, more than 6 times the 7-cent rate that the Federal Reserve said is the reasonable cost of a debit card transaction. A 600% profit that they're taking right out of every transaction. Of course, it means that the grocery store, the retailer, they have to charge more. Imagine, someone comes in and gets the special cup of coffee and a donut at the Rock Island Country Market, which I visited during the break here. 99-cent special. They use their debit card to pay for it. The Country Market is now going to be charged 44 cents for a 99-cent transaction. So it changed. The world changed last Saturday. The new law went into effect, capping for the largest banks in America the debit card swipe fee at about 24 cents, splitting the difference. There's still, these banks are doing quite well. The actual cost of the transaction, 4 cents, 7 cents, 12 cents, they're going to get 24 cents. Well, you would think that they could live with 100% profit on what they're doing. No way. Bank of America said to their loyal customers, sorry, but because we can't make as much off the retailers, we're going to nail our customers for a $5 monthly fee for the debit cards. Yesterday, I sent a letter to the CEO of Bank of America, Mr. Moynihan, and I said to Mr. Moynihan, I've just done the math here. And if your customers pay $60 a year for their debit cards, you are going to collect more money from your customers than you could possibly have lost because of this change in the law. You're overcharging your customers. It's not fair, and I want you to defend it. Let's see if he does. Not just for me, but for the people who bank at Bank of America and have debit cards there. You see, Madam President, what happened last Saturday is not just a change when it comes to debit card swipe fees. I think what happened last Saturday with this new law is empowering customers and retailers across America. Now, incidentally, Chase Bank, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America have all talked about imposing this debit card fee. If they decide that they want to penalize their customers and nail them $5 a month or $3 a month, that's their decision. But I hope that what happens next is that bank customers across America realize they have the right to change their banks, to move to banks that aren't going to nail them with these fees that are driven by greed. There's good news. There's thousands of banks across America for people to choose from and thousands of credit unions. And most of them, or many of them I should say, have already stated publicly they're not going to join in with the Bank of America of nailing their loyal customers with a debit card fee. The Press Democrat newspaper in Santa Rosa, California on Friday carried an article saying, quote, "Local banks say no to debit card fees." The article lists a number of local banks and credit unions that would not copy the Bank of America strategy. The article quotes Tom Duryea, CEO of Summit State Bank, and he said, "It's just not something we want to do to our customers. I'm not going to nickel and dime people over $5." Now that's a man speaking for a bank that I think has a future, a bank that realizes that if you treat your loyal customers right, they're going to stay loyal. But if Bank of America has their way and nails their loyal customers with a $5 monthly fee, I hope some of their customers will think twice about doing business there. Washington Federal, regional bank in Washington State, its spokesperson, Kathy Cooper, was quoted in the Oregonian newspaper saying, quote, "We have absolutely no plans to impose a debit card fee," end of quote. I'm going to put this statement in the record because I see one of my colleagues on the floor here. But across the United States, more and more banks and credit unions are making it clear that they are not going to nail their customers with a debit card fee. Now is the time for bank customers across America to say enough is enough. If you don't value me as a customer enough not to charge me a new $5 monthly fee just for trying to access my own checking account, my own bank account at your bank, I'm going to do my business elsewhere. I think that's an important thing to do. Of course, we need to stay vigilant to make sure that America's consumers have good, honest information about how banks are treating them. I'll be meeting later this week with the acting director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Raj Date. We'll be talking about how to ensure customers know what their rights are when it comes to banking services. And let me tell you, Madam President, there are Republicans who hate this agency like the devil hates holy water. The notion that the consumers of America would finally have a voice in Washington, keeping an eye on the activities of financial institutions, scares the living heck out of members of Congress, some members of Congress. But many of us believe that the scales have been tipped for too long on the other side, that many consumers are, frankly, at the mercy of these financial institutions and could use an advocate who stands up every once in a while and fights for them. Holly Petraeus is the wife of General Petraeus, who's now heading up our CIA, and she and her husband have certainly given great service to this country. I met with her just a few weeks ago, and she talked about the exploitation of men and women in uniform serving our country by many financial institutions. Predatory lending and awful practices. Many of these practices, incidentally, lead to these service members having to take an early discharge from service because they're so deeply in debt. I think that's a scandal, and I'm glad that Mrs. Petraeus has spoken out on it. And she is using this agency, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, to come to the assistance and protection of our men and women in uniform. That is a legitimate use of their responsibility, and for those who want to do away with the Bureau, let them explain, if they can, why they think our veterans and our service members don't deserve this kind of protection. I want to see the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau up and running. I think it's about time that we had some advocacy group standing up for men and women in uniform and consumers and retailers across America. I hope we can soon confirm the nominee for the head of that bureau, Richard Cordray. I have met Mr. Cordray, and he's going to be a smart, effective watchdog for America's consumers. As I said, there are some, particularly on the other side of the aisle, who hate the notion that there would be such an advocate and such a counsel available for consumers. But I think American consumers and families at least deserve to have someone speaking out when they're about to be exploited. The keys to a well-functioning market are competition, transparency, and choice. When these conditions are present, consumers have a fighting chance and they can thrive. So can small banks and credit unions. I'm going to keep standing up for these basic principles. I believe that competition and transparency are critical for a free market economy to operate in a just and fair way. It's the right thing to do. Madam President, I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Colorado.
Madam President, before the Democratic whip, the Assistant Majority Leader, leaves the floor, I just want to acknowledge the great work he's done in standing up for consumers and protecting their interests. And it fits with the purpose for which I rise today, which is to talk about protecting our public lands and the importance they hold for all of us as Americans. They're really at the heart of the way of life that we hold so dear in Colorado. In addition, I want to talk about how public lands are important to an issue that all of my colleagues care about, and that's creating jobs. Now, I know many of my colleagues, including the presiding officer, understand the value of public lands, but I want to take a few minutes and list some of the reasons that I think that they're a vital thread in the fabric of our country. First, we are a nation of explorers and risk takers, constantly in search of the next challenge to overcome or the next mountain literally to climb. Public lands, especially in the West, are a reminder of this heritage. And I want to also acknowledge that in the great Northeast of our country, where the presiding officer lives, that we have mountains and we have extensive public lands as well. And I know that same spirit is infused in the people of New Hampshire. But our public lands also benefit our communities across the country through the clean air and the clean water that they provide. And in urban and rural areas alike, open spaces filter and clean our air and water, improve the environment for surrounding communities while lowering stormwater management and water treatment costs. Access to the public lands and the many opportunities they provide are a key reason why many of us choose to live in the West. And I know this is particularly true in Colorado, where public lands and outdoor recreation are truly in our blood. It's also one of the reasons that Colorado is one of the most active and healthiest states in the country, and why I've been encouraging children and families across the nation to get outside and stay active, especially in our national parks. But, Madam President, the public lands are also, to coin a phrase, in our wallets. When discussing public lands, we can't forget their importance to our economy. Our public lands have long been a source of economic value, and multiple use is a key component of the management of our public lands. An example, extractive industries such as oil and gas development and mining will continue to be an important part of our economy in the West. But these uses are certainly not the only economic uses of our lands. Outdoor recreation, hunting, hiking, biking, the list goes on, are a major use of our lands. And our outdoor recreationists not only enjoy our land, they also support a large and growing industry of supply stores, manufacturers, guides, hotels, and other important businesses. And in fact, Madam President, in this time of economic uncertainty, outdoor recreation and tourism are two of the bright spots in our economy. And I want to draw attention to the chart that I brought to the floor to those viewing the floor of the Senate today. In 2006, the Outdoor Industry Foundation found that biking, hiking, and hunting and all the other outdoor recreation activities add $730 billion to our economy every single year. And perhaps most importantly, this is an area of our economy that continues to grow. It's grown by more than 6% just in 2011 alone, and has outpaced U.S. economic growth more generally. These numbers really tell a powerful story of the outdoor recreation industry's contribution to our economy. Now, we hear a lot about the problems that government causes, and there are certainly areas that we can reform. We can streamline government, make it more efficient. We can get government out of the way where appropriate, and we can increase oversight where necessary. But when I was traveling my home state of Colorado over the summer, like the presiding officer travels her state, I heard a lot about how government is working. I heard about partnerships between federal, state, and local governments, private businesses, and local stakeholders to preserve and protect our natural resources. And these efforts are improving the lives of Coloradans. They're creating jobs, they're making communities a better place to live, and they're building future economic opportunities. And I want to share a couple of examples in that vein, Madam President. In July, I was in the town of Creede, which is in the historic San Luis Valley of Colorado. And among other stops, I met with the Willow Creek Reclamation Committee. And this is a wonderful example, this committee, of citizens at the local level coming together to take on a problem and create solutions. And in this committee, you have retired miners, artists, local business people, ranchers, vacation homesteaders, and federal and state officials who are working together to clean up pollution in their watershed. The narrow valley that's above Creede is lined with abandoned mines. And while the area boasts some of the best examples of mining structures you'll find in the western United States, pollution from these abandoned mines hurts water quality. And the pollution was so bad that residents in the area feared that Creede would be placed on the national priorities list for a Superfund cleanup, a prospect that any community who's faced it understands would hurt their tourism-based economy. So in 1999, the residents formed this committee to do something about it themselves. And they worked with the Environmental Protection Agency, the Forest Service, the Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, state agencies, and many others, and developed a plan to clean up their watershed. And the plan they came up with is truly a comprehensive approach that recognizes the full value of their watershed to their community. And what struck me most, and again, I know the presiding officer senses and experiences the same spirit in her state of New Hampshire, is that nobody was talking about whether they were a Democrat or Republican. They weren't trying to wage political or partisan battles. They saw a problem affecting their livelihoods. They banded together as a community. They partnered with the federal, state, and local government officials, and they did something about it. Now their streams are healthier, their land is healthier, and their economy is healthier. And I'd like to bring some of that Creede pragmatism here to Washington, D.C. Our public lands are an invaluable natural resource. I hope we can come together in the Congress with policies and solutions to wisely utilize and conserve them. And in that spirit, let me provide some additional examples of what we could do here in the spirit of the people in Creede, Colorado. One incredibly successful government program that's been instrumental to the growth of outdoor recreation across the country is the Land and Water Conservation Fund, or the LWCF is the acronym. And in fact, it's been proven over and over again that every dollar of LWCF funding creates an additional $4 in economic value. And LWCF was developed on the belief that as we develop and exploit our oil and gas resources, we should set aside also some land for hunting, fishing, and recreation for the enjoyment of future generations. So we as a country set up a mechanism whereby royalties from oil and gas leases were to fully fund LWCF projects. Now, I have to tell you that instead of that mission being fully fulfilled, instead, every year those dollars are taken out of LWCF for other unrelated government expenditures, leaving in its wake a huge unmet need in each state across the country. While royalties flow into the government coffers, LWCF has continually been raided, and its authorized $900 million of funding every year has been fulfilled only twice since 1964. Only twice since 1964 has that full $900 million been appropriated. Now, not only are we robbing future generations of critical open spaces and outdoor recreation, we are underinvesting in our assets, our public lands that would drive job creation. I serve as the chairman of the National Parks Subcommittee, and I've seen how these funds have been particularly useful to our parks. And there's no better example in my state than the creation of the Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve. This magnificent park and preserve was made possible by LWCF appropriations that were obtained with very strong local support. Great Sand Dunes protects one of our nation's great landmarks, and it's also a source of tourist dollars for the surrounding rural communities. And that's why I've joined several of my colleagues, including Senator Bingaman, Senator Burr, Senator Baucus, the presiding officer, and others, to fight for full funding of LWCF. The point I want to emphasize here on the floor today to my colleagues is that when we talk about natural resources, we aren't just talking about beautiful landscapes and future generations. There are incredibly important economic benefits to preserving and protecting these lands. And in that spirit, I want to briefly discuss another key component of our public lands system, wilderness. Lands classified as wilderness with a big W are critical to our multiple use management strategy. Some areas should be preserved as wilderness, just as some areas are better suited to mining, oil and gas development, or off-road vehicle use. Wilderness provides opportunities for backpacking, fishing, hiking, grazing, and hunting, as well as protecting these precious landscapes for future generations. Wilderness, Madam President, also provides opportunities for our veterans to re-enter, reconnect, and heal. And I have a column here from the Denver Post yesterday that speaks to the ways in which veterans can reconnect to their purpose in life and to re-enter society. And I'd ask unanimous consent that it could be included in the record.
Without objection.
It's an inspiring column, and it speaks to the power of wilderness and wilderness activities in the context of our veterans returning home from standing up for us in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, speaking of wilderness opportunities, just this last week I introduced the San Juan Mountain Wilderness Act along with Senator Bennett. And similar to a bill that I introduced in the last Congress, my bill would designate, and we have a photograph of this wonderful, inspiring area. This bill would designate 33,000 acres in southwestern Colorado as wilderness. It would also designate about 22,000 acres as a special management area and withdraw over 6,000 acres from mineral entry lands within the Natarita Canyon area. Now, this bill is the work of extensive input and collaboration among and across every imaginable stakeholder group. And I want to particularly note the efforts of former Congressman John Salazar and his staff who worked with the affected Colorado County commissioners, interested citizens, and my staff in developing this legislation over the last 4 years. It's crafted to take into account the various ongoing uses of these lands, such as for water supplies and recreation, while also providing strong managerial protection for these sensitive lands. I don't have to tell you when you see this photograph among many that this region of Colorado is blessed with stunning beauty. Much of the land proposed for wilderness and other protections in our legislation are additions to existing wildernesses, such as the Mount Sneffels Wilderness Area and the Lizard Head Wilderness Area. The bill also establishes a new area called McKenna Peak. This peak presides over imposing sandstone cliffs which rise 2,000 feet above the surrounding area. It also provides important winter wildlife habitat for large numbers of deer and elk, which then draws many hunters from all over the country every year. Over 30,000 recreation use days are recorded annually during hunting season in this one game management unit. That is a significant number of recreation user days. The bill would also establish a Sheep Mountain Special Management Area. Since helicopter skiing currently exists in this area, the legislation designates the area in a way that protects its wilderness character but still allows this use to continue. This is, in my opinion, the type of flexibility that's a key for sound wilderness protection proposals and is a shining example of how protection can coexist with responsible use. Madam President, what I'm saying is the bill has been carefully tailored and crafted to apply deserving protections to these lands. This is how wilderness should and can be done. Now, between all of the benefits, clean air and water, recreation and economic growth, one would think that Congress could work together and enact common sense public lands legislation like my San Juan's Wilderness Bill. But I'm frustrated, I know the presiding officer is frustrated that this Congress hasn't recognized the opportunities that are before us. Instead of what I saw happening on the ground in Creede, Colorado, it seems like our politics here inside the Beltway are getting in the way of moving our country forward. A prime example of politics getting in the way, at least in the Senate, I'll come back to why I say just in the Senate, is a bipartisan bill that I've introduced called the Ski Area Recreation Opportunity Enhancement Act. I've worked closely with Senator Barrasso on it. We have an additional 10 co-sponsors across the country in the House, Representative Bishop and Representative Gett have championed this bill. And our bill would simply clarify that the Forest Service may permit year-round recreational activities where appropriate on ski areas on public lands. It includes no new federal spending, which I think is an attractive element in the legislation. It would actually increase the amount of money coming into the federal treasury because it would likely increase permit fees. And the bill would boost year-round activity in ski resorts on public lands, providing more opportunities for outdoor recreation, creating jobs in the process, and aiding those rural economies that surround ski areas. And in fact, the bill is so bipartisan and strongly supported that it passed the House last night by a vote of 394 to nothing. No House members voted against the bill. And yet, despite bipartisan, bicameral support for the bill and the fact that it would create jobs, I've not been able to get this bill, I should say, to a vote on the floor of the Senate. I'm tempted to ask for unanimous consent that the bill pass, but I will continue to work in the regular order here to move the bill to the floor of the Senate into passage. Madam President, I had a long career, if you want to call it that, as a high-altitude mountain climber before I came to the Congress. That experience has prepared me to serve in the House and now the Senate in unexpected ways. In 1992, I was on the south face of Mount McKinley, known to the people of Alaska as Denali as well, and we were 10 days into what was supposed to be a 7-day climb. We were out of food. The only way to get down was to literally go up and over the top of Mount McKinley. But the lesson I learned in that successful climb was that when you face 20 below temperatures and high winds, the only way home is over the top of the mountain. You've got to work together to accomplish the impossible. And when you do work together to accomplish the impossible, you find a way to make it happen. In some ways, I feel like that's the choice that Congress has to make as we face these challenging times. We can either work together to find a way up and over the summit, passing legislation that will create jobs, fix our budget problems, and start working on the problems that Americans face every day. Or we can keep fighting with each other and, in effect, starving the country of the leadership that I know Congress can provide and that we must provide in these challenging times. So, Madam President, as I close my remarks today, I ask my colleagues to join me in passing this straightforward, bipartisan and common-sense ski areas bill and to support full funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. I also ask my colleagues to work with me to enact locally developed wilderness proposals such as the San Juan Wilderness Act. As we tackle the problems of unemployment and how to grow the economy, let's not forget the important role that our public lands can and will play in the future. Madam President, thank you for your attention. I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka.